Domestic Animals, a Storybook for Children by Anonymous. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Chad Horner, located in Ballyclare, County Antrim, Northern Ireland. The horse is one of the noblest and most useful of the domestic animals. If properly managed, he is gentle and sometimes manifests a strong attachment for his master. He is found in almost all climates. The dog is a social animal and is the companion of man in all civilized countries. He varies in size from the little lapdog to the large mastiff and hound. Some of them are used to guard property from thieves. The cat is a useful animal, and there are very few little boys or girls that do not love the cat. In this country it is usually black, white or grey, but in Asia it is red, and at the Cape of Good Hope blue. In Egypt, cats were formerly worshipped, and severe laws were passed against those who ill-treated them. In China, they have little beds of down made for them, while they have silver collars for their necks and beautiful rings for their ears, made of jasper or sapphire. The Turks have little houses made for them and servants to attend them. The finest species of domestic cats are those called Angora. It is said that the cats of Russia have their tails 6 times as long as their bodies. The pig is not a very handsome animal, but makes excellent food. He never seems to be tired of eating, and if he has plenty of food, only stops to sleep or wallow in the dirt. He makes a sharp squealing noise when hungry. The camel is a native of Africa and Arabia. It has 2 humps upon its back, between which the natives lash their burdens. They have very long legs and are thus able to travel through the deep sands, where no other animal can go. They have also an extra stomach, where they can deposit water enough to last them 2 or 3 weeks. Thus the camel is able to travel across the long deserts where there is neither food nor water for hundreds of miles. The camel is very patient and never complains if he is able to carry the load, but if not, he sinks upon the ground, uttering the most piteous cries. The Arabs often eat their flesh and make butter of their milk. End of Domestic Animals, a Storybook for Children by Anonymous.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content.
The Enchanted Types by Frank L. Baum. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read by Wayne Cook. One time a Canuck became tired of his beautiful life and longed for something new to do. The Canucks have more wonderful powers than any other immortal folk, except perhaps the fairies and the Ryls. So one would suppose that a Canuck who might gain anything he desired by a simple wish could not be otherwise than happy and contented. But such was not the case of Popopo, the Canuck we are speaking of. He had lived for thousands of years and had enjoyed all the wonders he could think of. Yet life had become as tedious to him now as it might be to one who was unable to gratify a single wish. Finally, by chance, Popopo thought of the earth people who dwell in cities, and so he resolved to visit them and see how they lived. This would surely be fine amusement and serve to pass away many wearisome hours. Therefore, one morning, after a breakfast so dainty that you could scarcely imagine it, Popopo set out for the earth, and at once was in the midst of a big city. His own dwelling was so quiet and peaceful that the roaring noise of the town startled him. His nerves were so shocked that before he had looked around 3 minutes, he decided to give up the adventure and instantly return home. This satisfied for a time his desire to visit the earth cities, But soon the monotony of his existence again made him restless and gave him another thought. At night the people slept, and the cities would be quiet. He would visit them at night. So at the proper time, Popopo transported himself in a jiffy to a great city, where he began wandering about the streets. Everyone was in bed. No wagons rattled along the pavements. No throngs of busy men shouted and hallooed. Even the policeman slumbered slyly, and there happened to be no prowling thieves around. His nerves being soothed by the stillness, Popopo began to enjoy himself. He entered many of the houses and examined their rooms with much curiosity. Locks and bolts made no difference to a Canuck, and he saw as well in darkness as in daylight. After a time he stole into the business portion of the city. Stores are unknown among the immortals, who have no need of money or of barter and exchange, so Popopo was greatly interested by the novel sight of so many collections of goods and merchandise. During his wanderings he entered a millinery shop, and was surprised to see within a large glass case a great number of women's hats, each bearing in one position or another a stuffed bird. Indeed, some of the most elaborate hats had 2 or 3 birds upon them. Now, Canucks are the special guardians of birds and love them dearly. To see so many of his little friends shut up in a glass case annoyed and grieved Popopo, who had no idea they had purposely been placed upon the hats by the milliner. So he slid back one of the doors of the case, gave the little chirruping whistle of the Canucks that all birds knew well, and called, "Come, friends, the door is open. Fly out." Popopo did not know the birds were stuffed. But, stuffed or not, every bird is bound to obey a Canuck's whistle and a Canuck's call. So they left the hats, flew out of the case, and began fluttering about the room. "Poor dears," said the kind-hearted Canuck, "you long to be in the fields and forests again." Then he opened the outer door for them and cried, "Off with you, fly away, my beauties, and be happy again." The astonished birds at once obeyed, and when they had soared away into the night, the Canuck closed the door and continued his wandering throughout the streets. By dawn he saw many interesting sights, but day broke before he had finished the city, and he resolved to come the next evening a few hours earlier. As soon as it was dark the following day, he came again to the city, and on passing the millinery shop noticed a light within. Entering, he found 2 women, one of whom leaned her head upon the table and sobbed bitterly, while the other strove to comfort her. Of course Popopo was invisible to mortal eyes, so he stood by and listened to their conversation. "Cheer up, sister," said one. "Even though your pretty birds have all been stolen, the hats themselves remain." "Alas," cried the other, who was the milliner, "no one will buy my hats partly trimmed, for the fashion is to wear birds upon them, and if I cannot sell my goods, I shall be utterly ruined." Then she renewed her sobbing, and the Canuck stole away, feeling a little ashamed to realize that in his love for the birds he had unconsciously wronged one of the earth people and made her unhappy. This thought brought him back to the millinery shop later in the night, when the 2 women had gone home. He wanted in some way to replace the birds upon the hats, that the poor woman might be happy again. So he searched until he came upon a nearby cellar full of little gray mice, who lived quite undisturbed and gained a livelihood by gnawing through the walls into neighboring houses and stealing food from the pantries. "Here are just the creatures," thought Popo, "to place upon the women's hats. Their fur is almost as soft as the plumage of the birds, and it strikes me the mice are remarkably pretty and graceful animals. Moreover, they now pass their lives in stealing, and were they obliged to remain always upon women's hats, their morals would be much improved." So he exercised a charm that drew all the mice from the cellar and placed them upon the hats in the glass case, where they occupied the places the birds had vacated and looked very becoming, at least in the eyes of the unworldly Canuck. To prevent their running about and leaving the hats, Popopo rendered them motionless. and then he was so pleased with his work that he decided to remain in the shop and witness the delight of the milliner when she saw how daintily her hats were now trimmed. She came in early the next morning, accompanied by her sister, and her face wore a sad and resigned expression. After sweeping and dusting the shop and drawing the blinds, she opened the glass case and took out a hat. But when she saw a tiny gray mouse nestling among the ribbons and laces, she gave a loud shriek, and, dropping the hat, sprang with one bound to the top of the table. The sister, knowing the shriek to be one of fear, leaped upon a chair and exclaimed, "What is it? Oh, what is it?" "A mouse!" gasped the milliner, trembling with terror. Popopo, seeing the commotion, now realized that mice are especially disagreeable to human beings, and that he had made a grave mistake in placing them upon the hats. So he gave a low whistle of command that was heard only by the mice. Instantly they all jumped from the hats, dashed out the open door of the glass case, and scampered away to their cellar. But this action so frightened the milliner and his sister that after giving several loud screams, they fell upon their backs on the floor and fainted away. Popopo was a kind-hearted Canuck, but on witnessing all this misery caused by his own ignorance of the way of humans, he straightway wished himself at home, and so left the poor women to recover as best they could. Yet he could not escape a sad feeling of responsibility, and after thinking upon the matter, he decided that since he had caused the milliner's unhappiness by freeing the birds, he could set the matter right by restoring them to the glass case. He loved the birds and disliked to condemn them to slavery again, but that seemed the only way to end the trouble. So he set off to find the birds. They had flown a long distance, but it was nothing to Popopo to reach them in a second, and he discovered them sitting upon the branches of a big chestnut tree and singing gaily. When they saw the Canuck, the birds cried, "Thank you, Popopo. Thank you for setting us free." "Do not thank me," returned the Canuck, "for I have come to send you back to the millinery shop." "Why?" demanded a blue jay angrily, while the others stopped their songs. "Because I find the woman considers you her property, and your loss has caused her much unhappiness," answered Popopo. "But remember how unhappy we were in the glass case," said the robin redbreast gravely. "And as for being our property, you are Canuck and the natural guardian of all birds, so you know that nature created us free. To be sure, wicked men shot and stuffed us and sold us to the milliner, but the idea of our being our property is nonsense." Popopo was puzzled. "If I leave you free," he said, "wicked men will shoot you again, and you will be no better off than before." "Pooh!" exclaimed the blue jay. "We cannot be shot now, for we are stuffed. Indeed, 2 men fired several shots at us this morning, but the bullets only ruffled our feathers and buried themselves in our stuffing. We do not fear men now." "Listen," said Popopo sternly, for he felt the birds were getting the best of the argument. "The poor milliner's business will be ruined if I do not return you to her shop. It seems you are necessary to trim hats properly. It is the fashion for women to wear birds upon their headgear, so the poor milliner's wares, though beautiful by lace and ribbons, are worthless unless you are perched upon them." "Fashions," said a blackbird solemnly, "are made by men. What law is there among birds or Canucks that requires us to be the slaves of fashion?" "What have we to do with fashions anyway?" screamed a linnet. "If it were the fashion to wear Canucks perched upon women's hats, would you be contented to stay there? Answer me, Popopo." But Popopo was in despair. He could not wrong the birds by sending them back to the milliner, nor did he wish the milliner to suffer by their loss. So he went home to think what could be done. After much meditation, he decided to consult the king of the Canucks, and going at once to his majesty, he told him the whole story. The king frowned. "This should teach you the folly of interfering with earth people," he said. "But since you have caused all this trouble, it is your duty to remedy it. Our birds cannot be enslaved, that is certain. Therefore you must have the fashions changed, so it will no longer be stylish for women to wear birds upon their hats." "How shall I do that?" asked Popopo. "Easily enough. Fashions are often changed among the earth people, who tire quickly of any one thing. When they read in their newspapers and magazines that the style is so-and-so, they never question the matter, but at once obey the mandate of fashion. So you must visit the newspapers and magazines and enchant the types. Enchant the types? Echoed Popopo in wonder. Just so. Make them read that it is no longer fashionable to wear birds upon hats. That will afford relief to your poor milliner, and at the same time free thousands of your darling birds who have been so cruelly used. Popopo thanked the wise king and followed his advice. The office of every newspaper and magazine in the city was visited by the Canuck, and then he went to other cities until there was not a publication in the land that had not a new fashion note on its pages. Sometimes Popopo enchanted the types so that whoever read the print would see only what the Canuck wished them to. Sometimes he called upon the busy editors and befuddled their brains until they wrote exactly what he wanted them to. Mortals seldom knew how greatly they are influenced by fairies, Canucks, and Ryls, who often put thoughts into their heads that only the wise little immortals could have conceived. The following morning, when the poor milliner looked over her newspaper, she was overjoyed to read that no woman could now wear a bird upon her hat and be in style, for the newest fashion required only ribbons and laces. Popopo, after this, found much enjoyment in visiting every millinery shop he could find, and giving new life to the stuffed birds which were carelessly tossed aside as useless. And they flew to the fields and forests with songs of thanks to the good Canuck who had rescued them. Sometimes a hunter fires his gun at a bird and then wonders why he did not hit it. But having read this story, you will understand that the bird must have been a stuffed one from some millinery shop, which cannot, of course, be killed by a gun. End of The Enchanted Types by Frank L. Baum.
Fairer Than a Fairy, edited by Andrew Lang. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Fairer Than a Fairy. Once there lived a king who had no children for many years after his marriage. At length heaven granted him a daughter of such remarkable beauty that he could think of no name so appropriate for her as Fairer Than a Fairy. It never occurred to the good-natured monarch that such a name was certain to call down the hatred and jealousy of the fairies in a body on the child, but this was what happened. No sooner had they heard of this presumptuous name than they resolved to gain possession of her who bore it, and either to torment her cruelly, or at least to conceal her from the eyes of all men. The eldest of their tribe was entrusted to carry out their revenge. This fairy was named Legree. She was so old that she only had one eye and one tooth left, and even these poor remains she had to keep all night in a strengthening liquid. She was also so spiteful that she gladly devoted all her time to carrying out all the mean or ill-natured tricks of the whole body of fairies. With her large experience added to her native spite, she found but little difficulty in carrying off Fairer Than a Fairy. The poor child, who was only 7 years old, nearly died of fear on finding herself in the power of this hideous creature. However, when after an hour's journey underground she found herself in a splendid palace with lovely gardens, she felt a little reassured, and was further cheered when she discovered that her pet cat and dog had followed her. The old fairy led her to a pretty room which she said should be hers, at the same time giving her the strictest orders never to let out the fire which was burning brightly in the grate. She then gave 2 glass bottles into the princess's charge, desiring her to take the greatest care of them, and having enforced her orders with the most awful threats in case of disobedience, she vanished, leaving the little girl at liberty to explore the palace and grounds, and a good deal relieved at having only 2 apparently easy tasks set her. Several years passed, during which time the princess grew accustomed to her lonely life, obeyed the fairy's orders, and by degrees forgot all about the court of the king her father. One day, whilst passing near a fountain in the garden, she noticed that the sun's rays fell on the water in such a manner as to produce a brilliant rainbow. She stood still to admire it, when, to her great surprise, she heard a voice addressing her which seemed to come from the center of its rays. The voice was that of a young man, and its sweetness of tone and the agreeable things it uttered led one to infer that its owner must be equally charming, but this had to be a mere matter of fancy, for no one was visible. The beautiful rainbow informed Fairer-than-a-Fairy that he was young, the son of a powerful king, and that the fairy Lagree, who owed his parents a grudge, had revenged herself by depriving him of his natural shape for some years, that she had imprisoned him in the palace, where he had found his confinement hard to bear for some time, but now, he owned, he no longer sighed for freedom since he had seen and learned to love Fairer-than-a-Fairy. He added many other tender speeches to this declaration, and the princess, to whom such remarks were a new experience, could not help feeling pleased and touched by his attentions. The prince could only appear or speak under the form of a rainbow, and it was therefore necessary that the sun should shine on water so as to enable the rays to form themselves. Fairer-than-a-Fairy lost no moment in which she could meet her lover, and they enjoyed many long and interesting interviews. One day, however, their conversation became so absorbing and time passed so quickly that the princess forgot to attend to the fire, and it went out. Lagree, on her return, soon found out the neglect, and seemed only too pleased to have the opportunity of showing her spite to her lovely prisoner. She ordered Fairer-than-a-Fairy to start next day at dawn to ask Locrinos for fire with which to relight the one she had allowed to go out. Now this Locrinos was a cruel monster who devoured everyone he came across, and especially enjoyed a chance of catching and eating any young girls. Our heroine obeyed with great sweetness, and without having been able to take leave of her lover, she set off to go to Locrinos as to certain death. As she was crossing a wood, a bird sang to her to pick up a shining pebble which she would find in a fountain close by, and to use it when needed. She took the bird's advice, and in due time arrived at the house of Locrinos. Luckily she found only his wife at home, who was much struck by the princess's youth and beauty and sweet gentle manners, and still further impressed by the present of the shining pebble. She readily let Fairer-than-a-Fairy have the fire, and in return for the stone she gave her another, which, she said, might prove useful some day. Then she sent her away without doing her any harm. Lagree was as much surprised as displeased at the happy result of this expedition, and Fairer-than-a-Fairy waited anxiously for an opportunity of meeting Prince Rainbow and telling him her adventures. She found, however, that he had already been told all about them by a fairy who protected him, and to whom he was related. The dread of fresh dangers to his beloved princess made him devise some more convenient way of meeting than by the garden fountain, and Fairer-than-a-Fairy carried out his plan daily with entire success. Every morning she placed a large basin full of water on her window-sill, and as soon as the sun's rays fell on the water, the rainbow appeared as clearly as it had ever done in the fountain. By this means they were able to meet without losing sight of the fire or of the 2 bottles in which the old fairy kept her eye and tooth at night, and for some time the lovers enjoyed every hour of sunshine together. One day Prince Rainbow appeared in the depths of woe. He had just heard that he was to be banished from this lovely spot, but he had no idea where he was to go. The poor young couple were in despair, and only parted with the last ray of sunshine and in hopes of meeting next morning. Alas, next day was dark and gloomy, and it was only late in the afternoon that the sun broke through the clouds for a few minutes. Fairer-than-a-Fairy eagerly ran to the window, but in her haste she upset the basin, and spilt all the water with which she had carefully filled it overnight. No other water was at hand except that in the 2 bottles. It was the only chance of seeing her lover before they were separated, and she did not hesitate to break the bottle and pour their contents into the basin, when the rainbow appeared at once. Their farewells were full of tenderness. The prince made the most ardent and sincere protestations, and promised to neglect nothing which might help to deliver his dear Fairer-than-a-Fairy from her captivity, and implored to consent to their marriage as soon as they should both be free. The princess on her side vowed to have no other husband, and declared herself willing to brave death itself in order to rejoin him. They were not allowed much time for their adieus. The rainbow vanished, and the princess, resolved to run all risks, started off at once, taking nothing with her but her dog, her cat, a sprig of myrtle, and the stone which the wife of Locrinos gave her. When Lagree became aware of her prisoner's flight she was furious, and set off at full speed in pursuit. She overtook her just as the poor girl, overcome by fatigue, had lain down to rest in a cave which the stone had formed itself to shelter her. The little dog, who was watching her mistress, promptly flew at Lagree and bit her so severely that she stumbled against a corner of the cave and broke off her only tooth. Before she had recovered from the pain and rage this caused her, the princess had time to escape, and was some way on her road. Fear gave her strength for some time, but at last she could go no further and sank down to rest. As she did so, the sprig of myrtle she carried touched the ground, and immediately a green and shady bower sprang up round her, in which she hoped to sleep in peace. But Lagree had not given up her pursuit, and arrived just as Fairer-than-a-Fairy had fallen fast asleep. This time she made sure of catching her victim, but the cat spied her out, and springing from one of the boughs of the arbor, she flew at Legree's face and tore out her only eye, thus delivering the princess forever from her persecutor. One might have thought that all would now be well, but no sooner had Legree been put to flight than our heroine was overwhelmed with hunger and thirst. She felt as though she should certainly expire, and it was with some difficulty that she dragged herself as far as a pretty little green and white house, which stood at no great distance. Here she was received by a beautiful lady dressed in green and white to match the house, which apparently belonged to her, and of which she seemed the only inhabitant. She greeted the fainting princess most kindly, gave her an excellent supper, and after a long night's rest in a delightful bed, told her that after many troubles she should finally attain her desire. As the green and white lady took leave of the princess, she gave her a nut, desiring her only to open it in the most urgent need. After a long and tiring journey, Fairer than a Fairy was once more received in a house, and by a lady exactly like the one she had quitted. Here again she received a present with the same injunctions, but instead of a nut, this lady gave her a golden pomegranate. The mournful princess had to continue her weary way, and after many troubles and hardships she again found rest and shelter in a third house exactly similar to the two others. These houses belonged to 3 sisters, all endowed with fairy gifts, and all so alike in mind and person that they wished their houses and garments to be equally alike. Their occupation consisted in helping those in misfortune, and they were as gentle and benevolent as Legree had been cruel and spiteful. The third fairy comforted the poor traveler, begged her not to lose heart, and assured her that her troubles should be rewarded. She accompanied her advice by the gift of a crystal smelling bottle, with strict orders only to open it in case of urgent need. Fairer than a Fairy thanked her warmly, and resumed her way cheered by pleasant thoughts. After a time her road led through a wood, full of soft airs and sweet odors, and before she had gone 100 yards, she saw a wonderful silver castle suspended by strong silver chains to 4 of the largest trees. It was so perfectly hung that a gentle breeze rocked it sufficiently to send you pleasantly to sleep. Fairer than a Fairy felt a strong desire to enter this castle, but besides being hung a little above the ground, there seemed to be neither doors nor windows. She had no doubt, though really I cannot think why, that the moment had come in which to use the nut which had been given her. She opened it, and out came a diminutive hall porter, at whose belt hung a tiny chain, at the end of which was a golden key half as long as the smallest pin you ever saw. The princess climbed up one of the silver chains, holding in her hand the little porter who, in spite of his minute size, opened a secret door with his golden key and let her in. She entered a magnificent room which appeared to occupy the entire castle, and which was lighted by gold and jeweled stars in the ceiling. In the midst of this room stood a couch, draped with curtains of all the colors of the rainbow, and suspended by golden cords so that it swayed with the castle in a manner which rocked its occupant delightfully to sleep. On this elegant couch lay Prince Rainbow, looking more beautiful than ever, and sunk in profound slumber, in which he had been held ever since his disappearance. Fairer than a Fairy, who now saw him for the first time in his real shape, hardly dared to gaze at him, fearing lest his appearance might not be in keeping with the voice and language which had won her heart. At the same time she could not help feeling rather hurt at the apparent indifference with which she was received. She related all the dangers and difficulties she had gone through, and though she repeated the story 20 times in a loud, clear voice, the prince slept on and took no heed. She then had recourse to the golden pomegranate, and on opening it found that all the seeds were as many little violins which flew up in the vaulted roof and at once began playing melodiously. The prince was not completely roused, but he opened his eyes a little and looked all the handsomer. Impatient at not being recognized, Fairer than a Fairy now drew out her third present, and on opening the crystal scent bottle, a little siren flew out, who silenced the violins, and then sang close to the prince's ear the story of all his lady love had suffered in her search for him. She added some gentle reproaches to her tale, but before she had got far he was wide awake and transported with joy threw himself at the princess's feet. At the same moment the walls of the room expanded and opened out, revealing a golden throne covered with jewels. A magnificent court now began to assemble, and at the same time several elegant carriages filled with ladies in the most magnificent dresses drove up. In the first and most splendid of these carriages sat Prince Rainbow's mother. She fondly embraced her son, after which she informed him that his father had been dead for some years, that the anger of the fairies was at length appeased, and that he might return in peace to reign over his people who were longing for his presence. The court received the new king with joyful acclamations which would have delighted him at any other time, but all his thoughts were full of Fairer than a Fairy. He was just about to present her to his mother and the court, feeling sure that her charms would win all hearts, when the 3 green and white sisters appeared. They declared the secret of Fairer than a Fairy's royal birth, and the queen, taking the 2 lovers in her carriage, set off with them for the capital of the kingdom. Here they were received with tumultuous joy. The wedding was celebrated without delay, and succeeding years diminished neither the virtues, beauty, nor the mutual affection of King Rainbow and his queen, Fairer than a Fairy. End of Fairer than a Fairy. This recording is in the public domain. The House in the Wood, edited by Andrew Lang. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The House in the Wood, from the German of Grimm. A poor woodcutter lived with his wife and 3 daughters in a little hut on the borders of a great forest. One morning as he was going to his work, he said to his wife, "Let our eldest daughter bring me my lunch into the wood, and so that she shall not lose her way, I will take a bag of millet with me and sprinkle the seed on the path." When the sun had risen high over the forest, the girl set out with a basin of soup. But the field and wood sparrows, the larks and finches, blackbirds and greenfinches had picked up the millet long ago, and the girl could not find her way. She went on and on till the sun set and night came on. The trees rustled in the darkness, the owls hooted, and she began to be very much frightened. Then she saw in the distance a light that twinkled between the trees. "There must be people living yonder," she thought, "who will take me in for the night." And she began walking towards it. Not long afterwards she came to a house with lights in the windows. She knocked at the door, and a gruff voice called, "Come in!" The girl stepped into the dark entrance and tapped at the door of the room. "Just walk in," cried the voice, and when she opened the door, there sat an old gray-haired man at the table. His face was resting on his hands, and his white beard flowed over the table almost to the ground. By the stove lay 3 beasts, a hen, a cock, and a brindled cow. The girl told the old man her story and asked for a night's lodging. The man said, "Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" "Dukes," answered the beasts, and that must have meant, "We are quite willing," for the old man went on, "Here is abundance. Go into the back kitchen and cook us a supper." The girl found plenty of everything in the kitchen and cooked a good meal, but she did not think of the beasts. She placed the full dishes on the table, sat down opposite the gray-haired man, and ate till her hunger was appeased. When she was satisfied, she said, "But now I am so tired, where is a bed in which I can sleep?" The beasts answered, "You have eaten with him, you have drunk with him, of us you have not thought, sleep then as you ought." Then the old man said, "Go upstairs, and there you will find a bedroom. Shake the bed, and put clean sheets on, and go to sleep." The maiden went upstairs, and when she had made the bed, she lay down. After some time the gray-haired man came, looked at her by the light of his candle, and shook his head. And when he saw that she was sound asleep, he opened a trap door and let her fall into the cellar. The woodcutter came home late in the evening and reproached his wife for leaving him all day without food. "No, I did not," she answered. "The girl went off with your dinner. She must have lost her way, but will no doubt come back tomorrow." But at daybreak the woodcutter started off into the wood, and this time asked his second daughter to bring his food. "I will take a bag of lentils," said he. "They are larger than millet, and the girl will see them better and be sure to find her way." At midday the maiden took the food, but the lentils had all gone. As on the previous day, the wood birds had eaten them all. The maiden wandered about the wood till nightfall, when she came in the same way to the old man's house, and asked for food and a night's lodging. The man with the white hair again asked the beasts, "Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" The beasts answered, "Dukes," and everything happened as on the former day. The girl cooked a good meal, ate and drank with the old man, and did not trouble herself about the animals. And when she asked for a bed, they replied, "You have eaten with him, you have drunk with him, of us you have not thought, now sleep as you ought." And when she was asleep, the old man shook his head over her, and let her fall into the cellar. On the 3rd morning the woodcutter said to his wife, "Send our youngest child today with my dinner. She is always good and obedient, and will keep to the right path, and not wander away like her sisters, idle drones." But the mother said, "Must I lose my dearest child too?" "Do not fear," he answered. "She is too clever and intelligent to lose her way. I will take plenty of peas with me and strew them along. They are even larger than lentils, and will show her the way." But when the maiden started off with the basket on her arm, the wood pigeons had eaten up the peas, and she did not know which way to go. She was much distressed and thought constantly of her poor hungry father and her anxious mother. At last, when it grew dark, she saw the little light, and came to the house in the wood. She asked prettily if she might stay there for the night, and the man with the white beard again asked his beasts, "Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" "Dukes," they said. Then the maiden stepped up to the stove where the animals were lying, and stroked the cock and the hen, and scratched the brindled cow between its horns. And when at the bidding of the old man she had prepared a good supper, and the dishes were standing on the table, she said, "Shall I have plenty while the good beasts have nothing? There is food to spare outside. I will attend to them first." Then she went out and fetched barley and strewed it before the cock and the hen, and brought the cow an armful of sweet-smelling hay. "Eat that, dear beast," she said, "and when you are thirsty you shall have a good drink." Then she fetched a bowl of water, and the cock and the hen flew on to the edge, put their beaks in, and then held up their heads as birds do when they drink, and the brindled cow also drank her fill. When the beasts were satisfied, the maiden sat down beside the old man at the table and ate what was left for her. Soon the cock and hen began to tuck their heads under their wings, and the brindled cow blinked its eyes. So the maiden said, "Shall we not go to rest now? Pretty cock, pretty hen, and you, pretty brindled cow, what do you say now?" The animals said, "Dukes, you have eaten with us, you have drunk with us, you have tended us right, so we wish you good night." The maiden therefore went upstairs, made the bed, and put on clean sheets, and fell asleep. She slept peacefully till midnight, when there was such a noise in the house that she awoke. Everything trembled and shook. The animals sprang up and dashed themselves in terror against the wall. The beams swayed as if they would be torn from their foundations. It seemed as if the stairs were tumbling down, and then the roof fell in with a crash. Then all became still, and as no harm came to the maiden, she lay down again and fell asleep. But when she awoke again in broad daylight, what a sight met her eyes! She was lying in a splendid room furnished with royal splendor. The walls were covered with golden flowers on a green ground, the bed was of ivory and the counterpane of velvet, and on a stool nearby lay a pair of slippers studded with pearls. The maiden thought she must be dreaming, but in came 3 servants richly dressed, who asked what were her commands. "Go," said the maiden, "I will get up at once and cook the old man's supper for him, and then I will feed the pretty cock and hen and the brindled cow." But the door opened, and in came a handsome young man, who said, "I am a king's son, and was condemned by a wicked witch to live as an old man in this wood with no company but that of my 3 servants, who were transformed into a cock, a hen, and a brindled cow. The spell could only be broken by the arrival of a maiden who could show herself kind not only to men but to beasts. You are that maiden, and last night at midnight we were freed, and this poor house was again transformed into my royal palace." As they stood there, the king's son told his 3 servants to go and fetch the maiden's parents to be present at the wedding feast. "But where are my 2 sisters?" asked the maid. "I shut them up in the cellar, but in the morning they shall be led forth into the forest and shall serve a charcoal burner until they have improved, and will never again suffer poor animals to go hungry." End of The House in the Wood. End of The House in the Wood. This recording is in the public domain.
Jack and the Beanstalk by Joseph Jacobs. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Once upon a time, there lived a poor widow and her son Jack. One day, Jack's mother told him to sell their only cow. Jack went to the market, and on the way, he met a man who wanted to buy his cow. Jack asked, "What will you give me in return for my cow?" The man answered, "I will give you 5 magic beans." Jack took the magic beans and gave the man the cow. But when he reached home, Jack's mother was very angry. She said, "You fool, he took away your cow and gave you some beans." She threw the beans out of the window. Jack was very sad and went to sleep without dinner. The next day, when Jack woke up in the morning and looked out of the window, he saw that a huge beanstalk had grown from his magic beans. He climbed up the beanstalk and reached a kingdom in the sky. There lived a giant and his wife. Jack went inside the house and found the giant's wife in the kitchen. Jack said, "Could you please give me something to eat? I'm so hungry." The kind wife gave him bread and some milk. While he was eating, the giant came home. The giant was very big and looked very fearsome. Jack was terrified and went and hid inside. The giant cried, "Fee, fee, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bone to make my bread." The wife said, "There is no boy in here." So the giant ate his food and then went to his room. He took out his sacks of gold coins, counted them and kept them aside. Then he went to sleep. In the night, Jack crept out of his hiding place, took one sack of gold coins, and climbed down the beanstalk. At home, he gave the coins to his mother. His mother was very happy and they lived well for some time. Climbed the beanstalk and went to the giant's house again. Once again, Jan asked the giant's wife for food, but while he was eating, the giant returned. Jack leaped up in fright and went and hid under the bed. The giant cried, "Fee, fee, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." The wife said, "There is no boy in here." The giant ate his food and went to his room. There he took out a hen. He shouted, "Lay," and the hen laid a golden egg. When the giant fell asleep, Jack took the hen and climbed down the beanstalk. Jack the mother was very happy with him. After some days, Jack once again climbed the beanstalk and went to the giant's castle. For the third time, Jack met the giant's wife and asked for some food. Once again, the giant's wife gave him bread and milk, but while Jack was eating, the giant came home. "Fee, fee, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread," cried the giant. "Don't be silly. There is no boy in here," said the wife. The giant had a magical harp that could play beautiful songs. While the giant slept, Jack took the harp and was about to leave. Suddenly, the magic harp cried, "Help me, master! A boy is stealing me." The giant woke up and saw Jack with the harp. Furious, he ran after Jack, but Jack was too fast for him. He ran down the beanstalk and reached home. The giant followed him down. Jack quickly ran inside his house and fetched an axe. He began to chop the beanstalk. The giant fell and died. Jack and his mother were now very rich, and they lived happily ever after. The end of Jack and the Beanstalk by Joseph Jacobs. Read by Shah.
Molly Whuppie, edited by Joseph Jacobs. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Molly Whuppie. Once upon a time there was a man and a wife who had too many children, and they could not get meat for them, so they took the 3 youngest and left them in a wood. They traveled and could see never a house. It began to be dark, and they were hungry. At last they saw a light and made for it. It turned out to be a house. They knocked at the door, and a woman came to it who said, "What do you want?" They said, "Please let us in and give us something to eat." The woman said, "I can't do that, as my man is a giant, and he would kill you if he comes home." They begged hard. "Let us stop for a little while," said they, "and we will go away before he comes." So she took them in and set them down before the fire and gave them milk and bread, but just as they had begun to eat, a great knock came to the door, and a dreadful voice said, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of some earthly one. Who have you there, wife?" "Eh," said the wife, "it's 3 poor lassies cold and hungry, and they will go away. You won't touch 'em, man." He said nothing, but ate up a big supper and ordered them to stay all night. Now he had 3 lassies of his own, and they were to sleep in the same bed with the 3 strangers. The youngest of the 3 strange lassies was called Molly Whuppie, and she was very clever. She noticed that before they went to bed, the giant put straw ropes round her neck and her sister's, and round his own lassies' necks he put gold chains. So Molly took care and did not fall asleep, but waited till she was sure every one was sleeping sound. Then she slipped out of the bed, and took the straw ropes off her own and her sister's necks, and took the gold chains off the giant's lassies. She then put the straw ropes on the giant's lassies and the gold on herself and her sisters, and lay down. And in the middle of the night up rose the giant, armed with a great club, and felt for the necks with the straw. It was dark. He took his own lassies out of bed onto the floor, and battered them until they were dead, and then lay down again, thinking he had managed finely. Molly thought at times she and her sisters were off and away, so she wakened them and told them to be quiet, and they slipped out of the house. They all got out safe, and they ran and never stopped till morning, when they saw a grand house before them. It turned out to be a king's house, so Molly went in and told her story to the king. He said, "Well, Molly, you are a clever girl, and you have managed well, but if you would manage better, and go back and steal the giant's sword that hangs on the back of his bed, I would give your eldest sister my eldest son to marry." Molly said she would try. So she went back and managed to slip into the giant's house, and crept in below the bed. The giant came home and ate up a great supper and went to bed. Molly waited until he was snoring, and she crept out and reached over the giant and got down the sword, but just as she got it out over the bed it gave a rattle, and up jumped the giant, and Molly ran out at the door and the sword with her, and she ran and he ran till they came to the bridge of one hair, and she got over, but he couldn't, and he says, "Woe worth ye, Molly Whuppie, never ye come again." And she says, "Twice yet, Carla," quoth she, "I'll come to Spain." So Molly took the sword to the king, and her sister was married to his son. Well, the king, he says, "Ye've managed well, Molly, but if you would manage better, and steal the purse that lies beneath the giant's pillow, I would marry your second sister to my second son." And Molly said she would try. So she set out for the giant's house, and slipped in, and hid again below the bed, and waited till the giant had eaten his supper, and was snoring sound asleep. She slipped out, and slipped her hand below the pillow, and got out the purse, but just as she was going out, the giant wakened, and ran after her, and she ran and he ran, till they came to the bridge of one hair, and she got over, but he couldn't, and he said, "Woe worth ye, Molly Whuppie, never you come again." "Once yet, Carla," quoth she, "I'll come to Spain." So Molly took the purse to the king, and her second sister was married to the king's second son. After that the king says to Molly, "Molly, you are a clever girl, but if you would do better yet, and steal the giant's ring that he wears on his finger, I will give you my youngest son for yourself." Molly said she would try. So back she goes to the giant's house, and hides herself below the bed. The giant wasn't long ere he come home, and after he had eaten a great big supper, he went to his bed, and shortly was snoring loud. Molly crept out and reached over the bed, and got hold of the giant's hand, and she pulled until she got off the ring. But just as she got it off, the giant got up, and gripped her by the hand, and he says, "Now I have caught you, Molly Whuppie, and if I had done as much ill to you as ye have done to me, what would ye do to me?" Molly says, "I would put you in a sack, and I'd put the cat inside with you, and the dog aside you, and a needle and a thread and a shears, and I'd hang you up upon the wall, and then I'd go to the wood, and choose the thickest stick I could get, and I would come home and take you down, and bang you till you were dead." "Well, Molly," says the giant, "I'll just do that to you." So he gets a sack, and puts Molly into it, and the cat and the dog beside her, and a needle and thread and shears, and hangs her up on the wall, and goes to the wood to choose a stick. Molly, she sings out, "Oh, if you saw what I see." "Oh," says the giant's wife, "what do you see, Molly?" But Molly never said a word but, "Oh, if you saw what I see." The giant's wife begged that Molly would take her up into the sack till she would see what Molly saw. So Molly took the shears and cut a hole in the sack, and took out the needle and thread with her, and jumped down and helped the giant's wife up into the sack, and sewed up the hole. The giant's wife saw nothing, and began to ask to get down again, but Molly never minded, but hid herself at the back of the door. Home came the giant, and a great big tree in his hand, and he took down the sack and began to batter it. His wife cried, "It's me, man!" But the dog barked and the cat mewed, and he did not know his wife's voice. But Molly came out from the back of the door, and the giant saw her, and he after her, and he ran and she ran till they came to the bridge of one hair, and she got over, but he couldn't, and he said, "Woe worth you, Molly Whuppie, never you come again." "Never more, Carla," quoth she, "will I come again to Spain." So Molly took the ring to the king, and she was married to his youngest son, and she never saw the giant again. End of Molly Whuppie, edited by Joseph Jacobs. This recording is in the public domain.
The Old Man and His Grandson by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Andrew Gauntz. The Old Man and His Grandson. There was once a very old man whose eyes had become dim, his ears dull of hearing, his knees trembled, and when he sat at table he could hardly hold the spoon, and spilt the broth upon the tablecloth or let it run out of his mouth. His son and his son's wife were disgusted at this, so the old grandfather at last had to sit in the corner behind the stove, and they gave him his food in an earthenware bowl, and not even enough of it. And he used to look towards the table with his eyes full of tears. Once, too, his trembling hands could not hold the bowl, and it fell to the ground and broke. The young wife scolded him, but he said nothing and only sighed. Then they brought him a wooden bowl for a few halfpence, out of which he had to eat. They were once sitting thus when the little grandson of 4 years old began to gather together some bits of wood upon the ground. "What are you doing there?" asked the father. "I am making a little trough," answered the child, "for father and mother to eat out of when I am big." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while, and presently began to cry. Then they took the old grandfather to the table, and henceforth always let him eat with them, and likewise said nothing if he did spill a little of anything. End of The Old Man and His Grandson, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm.
The Six Sillies, edited by Andrew Lang. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Six Sillies. Once upon a time there was a young girl who reached the age of 37 without ever having had a lover, for she was so foolish that no one wanted to marry her. One day, however, a young man arrived to pay his addresses to her, and her mother, beaming with joy, sent her daughter down to the cellar to draw a jug of beer. As the girl never came back, the mother went down to see what had become of her, and found her sitting on the stairs, her head in her hands, while by her side the beer was running all over the floor, as she had forgotten to close the tap. "What are you doing there?" asked the mother. "I was thinking what I shall call my first child after I am married to that young man. All the names in the calendar are taken already." The mother sat down on the staircase beside her daughter and said, "I will think about it with you, my dear." The father, who had stayed upstairs with the young man, was surprised that neither his wife nor his daughter came back, and in his turn went down to look for them. He found them both sitting on the stairs, while beside them the beer was running all over the ground from the tap, which was wide open. "What are you doing there? The beer is running all over the cellar." "We were thinking what we should call the children that our daughter will have when she marries that young man. All the names in the calendar are taken already." "Well," said the father, "I will think about it with you." As neither mother, nor daughter, nor father came upstairs again, the lover grew impatient, and went down into the cellar to see what they could all be doing. He found them all three sitting on the stairs, while beside them the beer was running all over the ground from the tap, which was wide open. "What in the world are you all doing that you don't come upstairs, and that you let the beer run all over the cellar?" "Yes, I know, my boy," said the father, "but if you marry our daughter, what shall you call your children? All the names in the calendar are taken." When the young man heard this answer, he replied, "Well, goodbye, I am going away. When I shall have found 3 people sillier than you, I will come back and marry your daughter." So he continued his journey, and after walking a long way he reached an orchard. Then he saw some people knocking down walnuts and trying to throw them into a cart with a fork. "What are you doing there?" he asked. "We want to load our cart with our walnuts, but we can't manage to do it." The lover advised them to get a basket and to put the walnuts in it, so as to turn them into the cart. "Well," said he to himself, "I have already found someone more foolish than those 3. So he went on his way, and by he came to a wood. There he saw a man who wanted to give his pig some acorns to eat, and was trying with all his might to make him climb up the oak tree. "What are you doing, my good man?" asked he. "I want to make my pig eat some acorns, and I can't get him to go up the tree." "If you were to climb up and shake down the acorns, the pig would pick them up." "Oh, I never thought of that." "Here is the second idiot," said the lover to himself. Some way further along the road, he came upon a man who had never worn any trousers, and who was trying to put on a pair. So he had fastened them to a tree, and was jumping with all his might up in the air, so that he should hit the 2 legs of the trousers as he came down. "It would be much better if you held them in your hands," said the young man, "and then put your legs one after the other in each hole." "Dear me, to be sure, you are sharper than I am, for that never occurred to me." And having found 3 people more foolish than his bride, or her father, or her mother, the lover went back to marry the young lady, and in course of time they had a great many children. End of The Six Sillies, edited by Andrew Lang.
The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along, and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She brought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down to the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter Rabbit, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to help him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Ka-choo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity-not very fast and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it was best to go without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. End of The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter.
The Butterfly by Charlotte Maria Tucker. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Chad Horner, located in Ballyclare, County Antrim, Northern Ireland. Buy the truth and sell it not. Proverbs chapter 23, verse 23. A party of boys had been playing in the fields on a sunny afternoon in the bright month of June. They had been chasing a gay butterfly, which, in its uncertain flight, had led them over hedge and ditch, till at last the beautiful prize was won, and the brilliant insect remained a helpless prisoner in the hands of its pursuers. Alas for the butterfly! A few moments before so gay and so free, sometimes resting on a blossom, then fluttering up towards the sky. Its lovely wings were rudely torn away, and it lay quivering in the agonies of death. At this moment Ella Claremont, a young lady of the village, approached the party. She had seen the chase and its close, and looked with regret on the poor mangled butterfly. "Why did you not let it live?" said she. "It had never harmed you, and it was so happy. You easily took away its little life," she added. "But could any power on earth give that life back again?" The boys looked one upon another and were silent, till the eldest of them, Giles, replied, "I am sorry that I killed it, but I did not know that there was any harm." "Surely," said Ella in a very gentle voice, "in a world where there is so much pain, one would be sorry to add, even in the least degree, to the amount of it. There is another feeling," continued she, "that should make us merciful to every creature. We should look upon it as one of the wonderful works of God." "Why," said Anthony, "a butterfly is only a caterpillar after it has wings." "True, but what human skill could form a caterpillar?" It had been calculated that in a single caterpillar there were 60,000 muscles. An exclamation of astonishment burst from the boys. "They must be finer than spiders' threads," cried Giles. "I dare say," replied the lady, "that you are not aware that each separate spider's thread is said to be formed of about 3,000 joined together." "The world seems full of wonders," exclaimed little Robert. "It is indeed. The more we search into God's works, the more wisdom and skill do we behold." "I'll not kill a butterfly again," said Giles. "I never seen one fluttering in the sun," continued Ella, "without thinking of those lines. Thou hast burst from thy prison, bright child of the air, like a spirit just risen from its mansion of care. "That sounds very pretty," said Giles, "but I don't understand it." "It is not very difficult to explain," replied Ella. "The butterfly teaches us a joyful lesson. It is what is called a type of immortality. You see the lowly caterpillar crawling over a leaf. It cannot raise itself towards the sky. It cannot leave the earth. In this it is like what we are now. Then, as you know, it seems to die. It is wrapped up in its little covering, and there it lies without motion or feeling. That is what we must be." "Ah, I see. When we are in our coffins, dead and buried," cried Robert. "But the bright butterfly soon bursts from the dark case, and we do not rise from our graves." "We shall," replied Ella earnestly. "We all shall rise again. No longer prisoners bound to earth, no longer creeping on amidst trials and sorrows, but free, happy, glorious, shining in the beams of the Sun of Righteousness. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised." 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52. Why should we fear death? Why should we dread being laid in the cold tomb when we think of the hope set before us? Well may we cry, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 55. There was a deep silence for a few moments. Nothing was heard but the song of a lark high overhead as it soared towards the sky. Then Giles spoke in a tone of awe. "Will all rise again?" "Yes, all." "Will all rise to be free and happy and glorious?" "Alas, no," replied Ella. "How can we tell," continued the boy after a little hesitation, "whether we shall be among the happy ones?" "There will be but two classes then," said Ella, "as there are but two classes amongst those called Christians now. We may divide all who have heard of our Saviour into those who love God and those who love sin. Those who love sin will awake to misery. Those who love God will awake to glory." "But," said the boy anxiously, "there may be some who love God and really try to obey him, and yet sin sometimes." "All sin sometimes," replied Ella. "There is not one human being free from sin." "Then," said Giles, "I should be afraid that, when the trumpet sounded, my sins would be like chains and keep me down, so that I could not rise." Every eye was turned towards Ella. Every ear anxiously listened for her reply, for every young heart was conscious of some sin and felt the difficulty which Giles had started. "It would have been so," replied Ella, "had not the Saviour died for sinners like us. His blood washed us quite clean from all guilt. That is, if we really believe on him and love him. Let us look upon our sins as chains now, and struggle hard to burst them, and pray for grace to help us. Then, if we are Christ's people, we shall rise joyfully in that great day when the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God." 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16. "I think," said Giles, after a pause, "that sins are like chains, and very hard to break too. There is a temper now. I know that I've a bad temper. I determine over and over again that I will get rid of it, but the harder I struggle, the tighter the chain seems to grow." "The mother is trying to cure me of saying bad words," cried little Robert, "but it's no use. They will come. I say them when I'm not thinking about it." "Have you tried prayer?" inquired Ella. "Do you not know the precious promises? If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." James chapter 1, verse 5. "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." Luke chapter 11, verse 9. These words have often been such a comfort to me, when I felt how heavy my chain was, and how weak my efforts to get rid of it. And now, my good friends, I must leave you. Will you think over what I have said? "Yes, miss, and thank you for it," said Giles, touching his cap. Ella paused as she was turning to depart, and gazed upon the sky, all bright with the evening sun, setting amidst clouds of crimson and gold. "How glorious!" she cried. "How beautiful that work of God! He too speaks of the resurrection. He sinks to rise again." Just so is the Christian. His course he begins, like the sun in a mist, when he mourns for his sins, when all in a moment he breaks out and shines, and travels his heavenly way. And when he comes nearer to face his race, like a fine setting sun, he grows richer in grace, and gives a sure hope at the end of his days of rising in brighter array. Farewell, my children. Whether we shall see each other again on this earth, who shall dare to say? But we shall meet again when the last trumpet sounds, and the dead hear the Saviour's voice, and the Christians awake in his likeness. Let us live now as those who are waiting for the Lord, and who long for the hour of his appearing. Oh, when through earth and sea and skies the angels' final summons flies, may we through Christ immortal rise towards a heavenly home. They who together life have trod, may they together burst the sod, and glorious rise to meet their God. Come, Jesus, Saviour, come. End of The Butterfly by Charlotte Maria Tucker.
The Glass Dog by L. Frank Baum. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. An accomplished wizard once lived on the top floor of a tenement house and passed his time in thoughtful study and studious thought. What he didn't know about wizardry was hardly worth knowing, for he possessed all the books and recipes of all the wizards who had lived before him, and moreover, he had invented several wizardments himself. This admirable person would have been completely happy but for the numerous interruptions to his studies caused by folk who came to consult him about their troubles, in which he was not interested, and by the loud knocks of the iceman, the milkman, the baker's boy, the laundryman, and the peanut woman. He never dealt with any of these people, but they rapped at his door every day to see him about this or that, or try to sell him their wares. Just when he was most deeply interested in his books, or engaged in watching the bubbling of a cauldron, there would come a knock at his door, and after sending the intruder away, he always found he had lost his train of thought, or ruined his compound. At length these interruptions aroused his anger, and he decided he must have a dog to keep people away from his door. He didn't know where to find a dog, but in the next room lived a poor glass-blower, with whom he had a slight acquaintance. So he went into the man's apartment and asked, "Where can I find a dog?" "What sort of dog?" inquired the glass-blower. "A good dog. One that will bark at people and drive them away. One that will be no trouble to keep and won't expect to be fed. One that has no fleas and is neat in his habits. One that will obey me when I speak to him. In short, a good dog," said the wizard. "Such a dog is hard to find," returned the glass-blower, who was busy making a blue glass flower pot with a pink glass rose bush in it, having green glass leaves and yellow glass roses. The wizard watched him thoughtfully. "Why cannot you blow me a dog out of glass?" he asked presently. "I can," declared the glass-blower, "but it would not bark at people, you know." "Oh, I'll fix that easy enough," replied the other. "If I could not make a glass dog bark, I would be a mighty poor wizard." "Very well, if you can use a glass dog, I'll be pleased to blow one for you. Only you must pay for my work." "Certainly," agreed the wizard. "But I have none of that horrid stuff you call money. You must take some of my wares in exchange." The glassblower considered the matter for a moment. "Could you give me something to cure my rheumatism?" he asked. "Oh, yes, easily." "Then it is a bargain. I'll start the dog at once. What color glass shall I use?" "Pink is a pretty color," said the wizard. "And it is unusual for a dog, isn't it?" "Very," answered the glassblower. "But it shall be pink." So the wizard went back to his studies, and the glassblower began to make the dog. Next morning he entered the wizard's room with the glass dog under his arm, and set it carefully upon the table. It was a beautiful pink in color, with a fine coat of spun glass, and about its neck was a twisted blue glass ribbon. Its eyes were specks of black glass and sparkled intelligently, as do many of the glass eyes worn by men. The wizard expressed himself pleased with the glassblower's skill, and at once handed him a small vial. "This will cure your rheumatism," he said. "But the vial is empty," protested the glassblower. "Oh no, there is 1 drop of liquid in it," was the wizard's reply. "Will 1 drop cure my rheumatism?" inquired the glassblower in wonder. "Most certainly. That is a marvelous remedy. The 1 drop contained in the vial will cure instantly any kind of disease ever known to humanity. Therefore it is especially good for rheumatism. But guard it well, for it is the only drop of its kind in the world, and I've forgotten the recipe." "Thank you," said the glassblower, and went back into his room. Then the wizard cast a wizzy spell and mumbled several well-learned words in the wizardese language over the glass dog. Whereupon the little animal first wagged its tail from side to side, then winked its left eye knowingly, and at last began barking in the most frightful manner. That is, when you stop to consider, the noise came from a pink glass dog. There is something almost astonishing in the magic arts of wizards. Unless, of course, you know how to do the things yourself, when you are not expected to be surprised at them. The wizard was as delighted as the schoolteacher at the success of his spell, although he was not astonished. Immediately he placed the dog outside his door, where it would bark at anyone who dared knock and so disturb the studies of the master. The glassblower, on returning to his room, decided not to use the 1 drop of the wizard cure-all just then. "My rheumatism is better today," he reflected, "and I will be wise to save the medicine for a time when I am very ill, when it will be of more service to me." So he placed the vial in his cupboard and went to work blowing more roses out of glass. Presently he happened to think the medicine might not keep, so he started to ask the wizard about it. But when he reached the door, the glass dog barked so fiercely that he dared not knock, and returned in great haste to his own room. Indeed, the poor man was quite upset at so unfriendly a reception from the dog he had himself so carefully and skillfully made. The next morning, as he read his newspaper, he noticed an article stating that the beautiful Miss Midas, the richest lady in town, was very ill, and the doctors had given up hope of her recovery. The glassblower, although miserably poor, hard-working, and homely of feature, was a man of ideas. The glassblower, although miserably poor, hard-working, and homely of feature, was a man of ideas. He suddenly recollected his precious medicine, and determined to use it to better advantage than relieving his own ills. He dressed himself in his best clothes, brushed his hair and combed his whiskers, washed his hands and tied his necktie, blackened his hose, and sponged his vest, and then put the vial of magic cure-all in his pocket. Next, he locked his door, went downstairs, and walked through the streets to the grand mansion where wealthy Miss Midas resided. The butler opened the door and said, "No soaps, no chromos, no vegetables, no hair oil, no books, no baking powder. My young lady is dying, and we are well supplied for the funeral." The glass blower was grieved at being taken for a peddler. "My friend," he began, proudly. The butler interrupted him, saying, "No tombstones either. There is a family graveyard and the monuments built." "The graveyard won't be needed if you permit me to speak," said the glass blower. "No doctors, sir. They've given up my young lady. And she's given up the doctors," continued the butler calmly. "I'm no doctor," returned the glass blower. "Nor are the others. But what is your errand?" "I called to cure your young lady by means of a magical compound." "Step in, please, and take a seat in the hall. I'll speak to the housekeeper," said the butler, more politely. So he spoke to the housekeeper, and the housekeeper mentioned the matter to the steward, and the steward consulted the chief. And the chief kissed the lady maid and sent her to see the stranger. Thus are the very wealthy hedged around with ceremony, even when dying. When the lady's maid heard from the glass blower that he had a medicine which would cure her mistress, she said, "I am glad you came. But," he said, "if I restore your mistress to health, she must marry me." "I'll make inquiries and see if she's willing," answered the maid, and went at once to consult Miss Midas. The young lady did not hesitate an instant. "I'd marry any old thing rather than die," she screamed. "Bring him here at once." So the glass blower came, poured the magic drop into a little water, gave it to the patient, and the next minute Miss Midas was as well as she had ever been in her life. "Dear me," she exclaimed, "I've an engagement at the Fritters' reception tonight. Bring my pearl-colored silk, Marie, and I will begin my toilet at once. And don't forget to cancel the order for the funeral flowers and your mourning gown." "But, Miss Midas," remonstrated the glass blower, who stood by, "you promised to marry me if I cured you." "I know," said the young lady, "but we must have time to make proper announcement in the society papers and have the wedding cards engraved. Call tomorrow and we'll talk it over." The glass blower had not impressed her favorably as a husband, and she was glad to find an excuse for getting rid of him for a time. And she did not want to miss the Fritters' reception. Yet the man went home filled with joy, for he thought his stratagem had succeeded and he was about to marry a rich wife who would keep him in luxury forever afterward. The first thing he did on reaching his room was to smash his glass-blowing tools and throw them out the window. He then sat down to figure out ways of spending his wife's money. The following day he called upon Miss Midas, who was reading a novel and eating chocolate creams, as happy as if she had never been ill in her life. "Where did you get that magic compound that cured me?" she asked. "From a learned wizard," said he. And then, thinking it would interest her, he told how he had made the glass dog for the wizard, and how it had barked and kept everyone from bothering him. "How delightful," she said. I've always wanted a glass dog that could bark. But there is only one in the world, he answered, and it belongs to the wizard. You must buy it for me, said the lady. The wizard cares nothing for money, replied the glass blower. Then you must steal it from me, she retorted. I can never live happy another day unless I have a glass dog that can bark. The glass blower was much distressed at this, but he said he would see what he could do, for a man should always try to please his wife, and Miss Midas had promised to marry him within a week. On his way home he purchased a heavy sack, and then he passed the wizard's door, and the pink glass dog ran out to bark at him. He threw the sack over the dog, tied the opening with a piece of twine, and carried him away to his own room. The next day he sent the sack by messenger boy to Miss Midas, with his compliments, and later in the afternoon he called upon her in person, feeling quite sure he would be received with gratitude for stealing the dog she so greatly desired. But when he came to the door and the butler opened it, what was his amazement to see the glass dog rush out and begin barking at him furiously. Call off your dog, he shouted in terror. I can't, sir, answered the butler. My young lady has ordered the glass dog to bark whenever you call here. You'd better look out, sir, he added. If it bites you, you may have glassophobia. This so frightened the poor glass blower that he went away hurriedly. But he stopped at the drugstore and put his last dime in the telephone box so he could talk to Miss Midas about being bitten by the dog. Give me Pelif 6742, he called. Hello, what is it? Said a voice. I want to speak with Miss Midas, said the glass blower. Presently a sweet voice said, This is Miss Midas. What is it? Why have you treated me so cruelly and set the glass dog on me? Asked the poor fellow. Well, to tell you the truth, said the lady, I don't like your looks. Your cheeks are pale and baggy. Your hair is coarse and long. Your eyes are small and red. Your hands are big and rough. And you are bow-legged. But I can't help my looks, pleaded the glass blower. And you really promised to marry me. If you were better looking, I'd keep my promise, she returned. But under the circumstances, you are no fit mate for me. Unless you keep away from my mansion, I will set my glass dog on you. Then she dropped the phone and would have nothing more to say. The miserable glass blower went home with heart bursting with disappointment and began tying a rope to the bedpost by which to hang himself. Someone knocked at the door, and upon opening it, he saw the wizard. I've lost my dog, he announced. Have you, indeed? Replied the glass blower, tying a knot in the rope. Yes, someone has stolen him. That's too bad, declared the glass blower indifferently. You must make me another, said the wizard. But I cannot. I've thrown away my tools. Then what shall I do? Asked the wizard. I do not know, unless you offer a reward for the dog. But I have no money, said the wizard. Offer some of your compounds then, suggested the glass blower, who was making a noose in the rope for his head to go through. The only thing I can spare, replied the wizard thoughtfully, is a beauty powder. What? Cried the glass blower, throwing down the rope. Have you such a thing? Yes, indeed. Whoever takes the powder will become the most beautiful person in the world. If you will offer that as a reward, said the glass blower eagerly, I'll try to find the dog for you. For above everything else, I long to be beautiful. But I warn you, the beauty will only be skin deep," said the wizard. "That's all right," replied the happy glassblower. "When I lose my skin, I shan't care to remain beautiful." "Then tell me where to find my dog and you shall have the powder," promised the wizard. So the glass blower went out and pretended to search. And by he returned and said, "I've discovered the dog. You'll find him in the mansion of Miss Midas." The wizard went at once to see if this were true. And sure enough, the glass dog ran out and began barking at him. Then the wizard spread out his hands and chanted a magic spell which sent the dog fast asleep. When he picked him up and carried him to his own room on the top floor of the tenement house, afterward he carried the beauty powder to the glass blower as a reward, and the fellow immediately swallowed it and became the most beautiful man in the world. The next time he called upon Miss Midas, there was no dog to bark at him. And when the young lady saw him, she fell in love with his beauty at once. "If only you were a count or a prince," she sighed, "I would willingly marry you." "But I am a prince," he answered, "the prince of dog blowers." "Ah," she said, "then if you are willing to accept an allowance of $4 a week, I'll order the wedding cards engraved." The man hesitated, but when he thought of the rope hanging from his bedpost, he consented to the terms. So they were married, and the bride was very jealous of her husband's beauty, and led him a dog's life. So he managed to get into debt and made her miserable in turn. As for the glass dog, the wizard set him barking again by means of his wizardness, and put him outside his door. I suppose he is there yet, and am rather sorry, for I should like to consult the wizard about the moral to this story. End of The Glass Dog by L. Frank Baum. Read by Max Holloway.
The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Most terribly cold it was. It snowed, and was nearly quite dark, and evening, the last evening of the year. In this cold and darkness there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home she had slippers on, it is true, but what was the good of that? They were very large slippers, which her mother had hitherto worn, so large were they, and the poor little thing lost them as she scuffled away across the street, because of two carriages that had rolled by dreadfully fast. One slipper was nowhere to be found. The other had been laid hold by an urchin, and off he ran with it. He thought it would do capitally for a cradle when he some day or other would have children himself. So the little maiden walked on with her tiny naked feet, that were quite red and blue from the cold. She carried a quantity of matches in an old apron, and she held a bundle of them in her hand. Nobody had bought anything of her the whole livelong day. No one had given her a single farthing. She crept along trembling with cold and hunger, a very picture of sorrow, the poor little thing. The flakes of snow covered her long fair hair, which fell in beautiful curls around her neck. But of that, of course, she never once now thought, from all the windows and candles were gleaming, and it smelled so deliciously of roast goose, for you know it was New Year's Eve. Yes, of that she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, of which one advanced more than the other, she seated herself down and cowered altogether. Her little feet she had drawn up close to her, but she grew colder and colder, and to go home she did not venture, for she had not sold any matches and could not bring a farthing of money. From her father she would certainly get blows, and at home it was cold too, for above her she had only the roof, through which the wind whistled, even though the largest cracks were stopped with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost numbed with cold. Oh, a match might afford her a world of comfort, if she only dared take a single one out of the bundle, draw it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. She drew one out. Risht! How it blazed! How it burned! It was a warm, bright flame, like a candle, as she held her hands over it. It was a wonderful light. It seemed really to the little maiden as though she was sitting before a large iron stove with burnished brass feet and a brass ornament at top. The fire burned with such blessed influence. It warmed so delightfully. The little girl had already stretched out her feet to warm them too, but the small flame went out, the stove vanished. She had only the remains of the burnt-out match in her hand. She rubbed another one against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell on the wall, there the wall became transparent like a veil, so she could see into the room. On the table was spread a snow-white tablecloth. Upon it was a splendid porcelain service, and the roast goose was steaming famously with its stuffing of apple and dried plums. And what was still more capital to behold was, the goose hopped down from its dish, reeled about on the floor with a knife and fork in its breast, till it came up to the poor little girl, when the match went out, and nothing but a thick, cold, damp wall was left behind. She lighted another match. Now there she was sitting under the most magnificent Christmas tree. It was still larger and more decorated than the one she had seen through the glass door in the rich merchant's house. Thousands of lights were burning on the green branches, and gaily colored pictures, such as she had seen in the shop windows, looked down upon her. The little maiden stretched out her hands towards them when the match went out. The lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher, and she saw them now as stars in heaven. One fell down and formed a long trail of fire. "Someone is just dead," said the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only person who had loved her and who was now no more, had told her that when a star falls, a soul ascends to God. She drew another match against the wall, and it was again light, and the lustre there stood her old grandmother, so bright and radiant, so mild, with such an expression of love. "Grandmother," cried the little one, "oh, take me with you. You go away when the match burns out. You vanish like a warm stove, like the delicious roast goose, and like the magnificent Christmas tree." And she rubbed the whole bundle of matches quickly against the wall, for she wanted to be quite sure of keeping her grandmother near her. And the matches gave such a brilliant light that it was brighter than at noonday. Never formerly had the grandmother seen so beautifully and so tall. She took the little maiden on her arm, and both flew in the brightness and in joy so high, so very high, and then above neither was cold, nor hunger, nor anxiety. They were with God. But in the corner, at the cold hour of dawn, sat the poor girl with rosy cheeks and a smiling mouth, leaning against the wall, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and stark sat the child there with her matches, of which one bundle had been burned. She wanted to warm herself, people said. No one had the slightest suspicion of what a beautiful thing she had seen. No one ever dreamed of the splendor in which, with her grandmother, she had entered on the joys of the new year. End of The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Prisha Goyal.
The Story of the Three Little Pigs by Unknown. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Chad Horner, located in Ballyclare, County Antrim, Northern Ireland. Once upon a time there was an old sow with 3 little pigs, and as she had not enough to keep them, she sent them out to seek their fortune. The first that went off met a man with a bundle of straw and said to him, "Please, man, give me that straw to build me a house," which the man did, and the little pig built a house with it. Presently came along a wolf and knocked at the door and said, little pig, let me come in." To which the pig answered, "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed and he puffed and he blew his house in and ate up the little pig. The second pig met a man with a bundle of furs and said, "Please, man, give me that furs to build a house," which the man did, and the pig built his house. Then along came the wolf and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." So he huffed and he puffed and he huffed and he puffed, and at last he blew the house down and ate up the second pig. The third little pig met a man with a load of bricks and said, "Please, man, give me those bricks to build a house with." So the man gave him the bricks and he built his house with them. So the wolf came, as he did, to the other little pigs and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in." Well, he huffed and he puffed and he huffed and he puffed and he puffed and he huffed, but he could not get the house down. When he found that he could not, with all his huffing and puffing, blew the house down, he said, "Little pig, I know where there is a nice field of turnips." "Where?" said the little pig. "Oh, in Mr. Smith's home field. And if you will be ready tomorrow morning, I will call for you, and we will go together and get some for dinner." "Very well," said the little pig, "I will be ready. What time do you mean to go?" "Oh, at 6 o'clock. Well, the little pig got up at 5 and got the turnips and was home again before 6. When the wolf came, he said, "Little pig, are you ready?" "Ready?" said the little pig. "I have been and come back again and got a nice pot full for dinner." The wolf felt very angry at this, but thought that he would be up to the little pig somehow or other. So he said, "Little pig, I know where there is a nice apple tree." "Where?" said the pig. "Down at Merry Garden," replied the wolf, "and if you will not deceive me, I will come for you at 5 o'clock tomorrow, and we will go together and get some apples." Well, the little pig woke at 4 the next morning and bustled up and went off for the apples, hoping to get back before the wolf came. But he had farther to go and had to climb the tree, so that just as he was coming down from it, he saw the wolf coming, which, as you may suppose, frightened him very much. When the wolf came up, he said, "Little pig, what? Are you here before me? Are they nice apples?" "Yes, very," said the little pig. "I will throw you down one." And he threw it so far that while the wolf was gone to pick it up, the little pig jumped down and ran home. The next day the wolf came again and said to the little pig, "Little pig, is there a fair in the town this afternoon? Will you go?" "Oh, yes," said the pig, "I will go. What time shall you be ready?" "At 3, said the wolf. So the little pig went off before the time as usual and got to the fair and bought a butter churn and was on his way home with it when he saw the wolf coming. Then he could not tell what to do. So he got into the churn to hide, and in doing so turned it round, and it began to roll and rolled down the hill with the pig inside it, which frightened the wolf so much that he ran home without going to the fair. He went to the little pig's house and told him how frightened he had been by a great round thing which came down the hill past him. Then the little pig said, "Ha! I frightened you, did I? I had been to the fair and bought a butter churn, and when I saw you I got into it and rolled down the hill." Then the wolf was very angry indeed, and declared he would eat up the little pig, and that he would get down the chimney after him. When the little pig saw what he was about, he hung on the pot full of water and made up a blazing fire, and just as the wolf was coming down, took off the cover of the pot, and in fell the wolf. And the little pig put on the cover again in an instant, boiled him up, and ate him for supper, and lived happy ever after. End of the story of the 3 little pigs by Unknown.
The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. It was lovely summer weather in the country, and the golden corn, the green oats, and the haystacks filled up in the meadows looked beautiful. The stork walking about on his long red legs chattered in the Egyptian language, which he had learned from his mother. The cornfields and meadows were surrounded by large forests, in the midst of which were deep pools. It was indeed delightful to walk about in the country. In a sunny spot stood a pleasant old farmhouse close by a deep river, and from the house down to the waterside grew great burdock leaves, so high that under the tallest of them a little child could stand upright. Thus the spot was as wild as the center of a thick wood. In this snug retreat sat a duck on her nest, watching for her young brood to hatch. She was beginning to get tired of her task. Her little ones were a long time coming out of their shells, and she seldom had any visitors. The other ducks liked much better to swim about in the river than to climb the slippery banks, and sit under a burdock leaf to have a gossip with her. At length one shell cracked, and then another, and for each egg came a living creature that lifted its head and cried, "Bee, bee, quack, quack," said the mother. And then they all quacked as well as they could, and looked about them on every side at the large green leaves. Their mother allowed them to look as much as they liked because green is good for the eyes. "How large the world is," said the young ducks. When they found how much more room they now had than while they were inside the eggshell, "Do you imagine this is the whole world?" asked the mother. "Wait till you have seen the garden. It stretches far beyond that to the person's field. But I have never ventured to such a distance. Are you all out?" she continued, rising. "No, I declare the largest egg lies there still. I wonder how long this is to last. I'm quite tired of it," and she seated herself again on the nest. "Well, how are you getting on?" asked an old duck, who paid her a visit. "One egg is not hatched yet," said the duck. "It will not break, but just look at the others. Are they not the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw? They are the image of their father, who is so unkind. He never comes to see." "Let me see the egg that will not break," said the duck. "I have no doubt it is a turkey's egg. I was persuaded to hatch some once, and after all my care and trouble with the young ones, they were afraid of the water. I quacked and clucked, but all to no purpose. I couldn't get them to venture in. Let me look at the egg. Yes, that it's a turkey's egg. Take my advice, leave it where it is, and teach the other children to swim." "I think I will sit on it a little while longer," said the duck. "As I have sat so long already, a few days will be nothing." "Please yourself," said the old duck, and she went away. At last the large egg broke, and a young one crept forth crying, "Peep, peep." It was very large and ugly. The duck started at it and exclaimed, "It's very large, and not at all like the others. I wonder if it really is a turkey." "We shall soon find out. However, when we go to the water, it must go in, if I have to push it myself." On the next day, the weather was delightful, and the sun shone brightly on the green burdock leaves. So the mother duck took her young brood down the water, and jumped in with a splash. "Quack, quack!" cried she, and one after another the little ducklings jumped in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up again in an instant, and swam about quite prettily with their legs, battling under them as easily as possible, and the ugly duckling was also in the water swimming with them. "Oh," said the mother, "there is not a turkey. How well he uses his leg, and how upright he holds himself. He is my own child, and he is not so very ugly after all, if you look at him properly. Quack, quack! Come with me now. I will take you into grand society and introduce you to the farmyard, but you must keep close to me, or you may be trodden upon. And above all, beware of the cats." When they reached the farmyard, there was a great disturbance. 2 families were fighting for an eel's head, which, after all, was carried off by the cat. "See, children, that is the way of the world," said the mother duck, wetting her beak, for she would have liked the eel's head first. "Come now, use her legs, and let me see how well you can behave. You must bow your heads prettily to the old duck yonder. She is the highest born of them, and has Spanish blood. Therefore she is well off. Don't you see, she has a red flag tied to her leg, which is something very grand, and a great honor for a duck. It shows that every one is anxious not to lose her, as she can be recognized both by man and beast. Come now, do not turn your toes. A well-bred duckling spread his feet wide apart, just like his father and mother, in this way. Now bend your neck and say quack." The ducklings did as they were bid, but the other duck started and said, "Look, here comes another brood, as if there were not enough of us already. And what a queer-looking object one of them is. We don't want him here." And then one flew out and bit him in the neck. "Let him alone," said the mother. "He is not doing any harm." "Yes, but he is so big and ugly," said the spiteful duck, "and therefore he must be turned out." "The others are very pretty children," said the old duck, with the rag on her leg. "Oh, but that one, I wish his mother could improve him a little." "That is impossible, your grace," replied the mother. "He is not pretty, but he has a very good disposition, and swims as well or even better than the others. I think he will grow up pretty, and perhaps be smaller. He has remained too long in the egg, and therefore his figure is not properly formed." And then she stroked his neck and smoothed the feather, saying, "It's a drake, and therefore not of so much consequence. I think he will grow up strong and able to take care of himself." "The other ducklings are graceful enough," said the old duck. "Now make yourself at home, and if you can find an eel's head, you can bring it to me." And so they made themselves comfortable. But the poor duckling, who had crept out of his shell last of all, and looked so ugly, was bitten and pushed and made fun of, not only by the ducks, but by all the poultry. "He is too big," they all said, and the turkey cock, who had been born into the world with spurs, and fancied himself really an emperor, puffed himself out like a vessel in full sail, and flew at the duckling, and became quite red in the head with passion, so that the poor little thing didn't know where to go, and was quite miserable because he was so ugly, and laughed at by the whole farmyard. So it went on from day to day till it got worse and worse. The poor duckling was driven about by everyone. Even his brothers and sisters were unkind to him, and would say, "Ah, you ugly creature, I wish the cat would get you." And his mother said she wished he had never been born. The ducks picked him, the chickens beat him, and the girl who fed the poultry kicked him with her feet. So at last he ran away, frightening the little birds in the hedge as he flew over the paling. "They are afraid of me because I'm ugly," he said. So he closed his eyes and flew still further, until he came out on a large moor inhabited by wild ducks. Here he remained the whole night, feeling very tired and sorrowful. In the morning, when the wild ducks rose in the air, they started at their new comrade. "What sort of duck are you?" they all said, coming round him. He bowed to them, and was as polite as he could be, but he didn't reply to their question. "You are exceedingly ugly," said the wild ducks, "but that will not matter if you don't want to marry one of our family." Poor thing, he had no thoughts of marriage. All he wanted was permission to lie among the rushes and drink some of the water on the moor. After he had been on the moor 2 days, there came 2 wild geese, or rather gosling, for they hadn't been out of the egg long, and were very saucy. "Listen, friend," said one of them to the duckling, "you are so ugly that we will like you very well. Well, you go with us, and become a bird of passage. Not far from here is another moor in which there are some pretty wild geese, all unmarried. It's a chance for you to get a wife. You may be lucky, ugly as you are." "Pop, pop!" sounded in the air, and the 2 wild geese fell dead among the rushes, and the water was tinged with blood. "Pop, pop!" echoed far and wide in the distance, and whole flocks of wild geese rose up from the rushes. The sound continued from every direction, for the sportsmen surrounded the moor, and some were even seated on branches of trees, overlooking the rushes. The blue smoke from the guns rose like clouds over the dark trees, and as it floated away across the water, a number of sporting dogs bounded in among the rushes, which bent beneath them wherever they went. How they terrified the poor duckling! He turned away his head to hide it under his wing, and at the same moment a large terrible dog passed quite near him. His jaws were open, his tongue hung from his mouth, and his eyes glared fearfully. He thrust his nose close to the duckling, showing his sharp teeth, and then he went into the water without touching him. "Oh," sighed the duckling, "how thankful I am for being so ugly. Even a dog will not bite me." And so he lay quite still, while the shot rattled through the rushes, and gun after gun was fired over him. It was late in the day before all became quiet, but even then the poor young thing didn't dare to move. He waited quietly for several hours, and then, after looking carefully around him, hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over field and meadow till a storm arose, and he could hardly struggle against it. Towards evening he reached a poor little cottage that seemed ready to fall, and only remained standing because it couldn't decide on which side to fall first. The storm continued so violent that the duckling could go no further. He sat down by the cottage, and then he noticed that the door wasn't quite closed, in consequence of one of the hangs having given away. He sat down by the cottage, and then he noticed that the door wasn't quite closed, in consequence of one of the hangs having given way. There was therefore a narrow opening near the bottom large enough for him to slip through, which he did very quietly, and got a shelter for the night. A woman, a tomcat, and a hen lived in this cottage. The tomcat, whom the mistress called my little son, was a great favorite. He could raise his back and purr, and could even throw out sparks from his fur if it were struck the wrong way. The hen had very short legs, so she was called Chicky Shortlegs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she had been her own child. In the morning, the strange visitor was discovered, and the tomcat began to purr and the hen to cluck. "What is that noise about?" said the old woman, looking round the room. But her sight wasn't very good. Therefore, when she saw the duckling, she thought it must be a fat dog that had strayed from home. "Oh, what a prize!" she exclaimed. "I hope it's not a drake. From then I shall have some duck's eggs. I must wait to see." So the duckling was allowed to remain on trail for 3 weeks. But there were no eggs. Now the tomcat was the master of the house, and the hen was mistress. And they always said, "we and the world," for they believed themselves to be half the world, and the better half too. The duckling thought that others might hold a different opinion on the subject, but the hen wouldn't listen to such doubts. "Can you lay eggs?" she asked. "No." "Then have the goodness to hold your tongue. Can you raise your back, or purr, or throw out sparks?" said the tomcat. "No." "Then you have no right to express an opinion when sensible people are speaking." So the duckling sat in a corner, feeling very low-spirited, till the sunshine and the fresh air came into the room through the open door. And then he began to feel such a great longing for a swim on the water that he couldn't help telling the hen. "What an absurd idea!" said the hen. "You have nothing else to do, therefore you have foolish fancies. If you could purr or lay eggs, they would pass away." "But it is so delightful to swim about on the water," said the duckling, "and so refreshing to feel it close over your head while you dive down the bottom." "Delightful indeed," said the hen. "Why, you must be crazy," asked the cat. "He is the cleverest animal I know. Ask him how he would like to swim about in the water, or to dive under it. For I will not speak of my own opinion. Ask our mistress, the old woman. There is no one in the world more clever than she is. Do you think she would like to swim, or to let the water close over her head?" "You do not understand me," said the duckling. "We do not understand you? Who can understand you, I wonder? Do you consider yourself more clever than the cat, or the old woman?" "I will say nothing of myself. Don't imagine such nonsense, child, and thank your good fortune that you have been received here. Are you not in a warm room, and in society from which you may learn something? But you are a chatter, and your company isn't very agreeable. Believe me, I speak only for your own good. I may tell you unpleasant truths, but that is a proof of my friendship. I advise you, therefore, to lay eggs and learn to purr as quickly as possible. "I believe I must go out into the world again," said the duckling. "Yes, do," said the hen. So the duckling left the cottage and soon found water on which it could swim and dive, but was avoided by all other animals because of its ugly appearance. Autumn came, and the leaves in the forest turned to orange and gold. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fly and whirled them in the cold air. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fell and whirled them in the cold air. The clouds, heavy with hail and snowflakes, hung low in the sky, and the raven stood on the ferns crying, "Croak, croak, croak." It made one shiver with cold to look at him. All this was very sad for the poor little duckling. One evening, just as the sun set amid radiant clouds, there came a large flock of beautiful birds out of the bush. The duckling had never seen any like them before. They were swans, and they curved their graceful necks, while their soft plumage shone with dazzling whiteness. They uttered a singular cry as they spread their glorious wings and flew away from those cold regions to warmer countries across the sea. As they mounted higher and higher in the air, the ugly little duckling felt quite a strange sensation as he watched them. He whirled himself in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck toward them, and uttered a cry so strange that it frightened himself. Could he ever forget those beautiful, happy birds? And when at last they were out of his sight, he divided under the water, and rose again almost beside himself with excitement. He knew not the name of these birds, nor where they had flown, but he felt toward them as he had never felt for any other bird in the world. He wasn't envious of these beautiful creatures, but wished to be as lovely as they. Poor ugly creature! How gladly he would have lived even with the ducks, had they only given him encouragement. The winter grew colder and colder. He was obliged to swim about on the water to keep it from freezing. But every night the space on which he swam became smaller and smaller. At length it froze so hard that the ice in the water crackled as he moved, and the duckling had to paddle with his legs as well as he could to keep the space from closing up. He became exhausted at last, and lay still and helpless, frozen fast in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant who was passing by saw what had happened. He broke the ice in pieces with his wooden shoe, and carried the duckling home to his wife. The warmth revived the poor little creature, but when the children wanted to play with him, the duckling thought they would do him some harm. So he started up in terror, fluttered into the milk pan, and splashed the milk about the room. Then the woman clapped her hands, which frightened him still more. He flew first into the butter cask, then into the meal tub, and out again. What a condition he was in! The woman screamed, and struck at him with the tongs. The children laughed and screamed and tumbled over each other in their efforts to catch him. But luckily he escaped, The door stood open. The poor creature could just manage to slip out among the bushes and lie down quite exhausted in newly fallen show. Were I to relate all the misery and privations which the poor little duckling endured during the hard winter. But when it had passed, he found himself lying one morning in a moor amongst the rushes. He felt the warm sun shining, and heard the lark singing, and saw that all around was beautiful spring. Then the young bird felt that his wings were strong, as he flapped them against his sides, and rose high into the air. They bore him onwards, until he found himself in a large garden. Before he really knew how it had happened, the apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elders bent their long green branches down the stream, which wound round a smooth lawn. Everything looked beautiful in the freshness of early spring. From a thicket close by came 3 beautiful white swans, rustling their feathers, and swimming lightly over the smooth water. The duckling remembered the lovely birds, and felt more strangely unhappy than ever. "I will fly to those royal birds," he exclaimed, "and they will kill me because I'm so ugly and dare to approach them. But it doesn't matter. Better be killed by them than picked by the ducks, beaten by the hens, pushed about by the maiden who feeds the poultry, or starved with hunger in the winter." Then he flew to the water and swam towards the beautiful swans. The moment they espied the stranger, they rushed to meet him with outstretched wings. "Kill me," said the poor bird, and he bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited death. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark, grey bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan, to be born in a duck's nest, in a farmyard, is of no consequence to a bird, if it's hatched from a swan's egg. He now felt glad, and having suffered sorrow and trouble, because it enabled him to enjoy so much better all the pleasure and happiness around him. For the great swans swam round the newcomer and stroked his neck with their beaks as a welcome. Into the garden presently came some little children and threw bread and cake into the water. "See," cried the youngest, "there is a new one," and the rest were delighted, and ran to their father and mother, dancing and clapping their hands, and shouting joyously, "There is another swan come, a new one has arrived." Then they threw more bread and cake into the water and said, "The new one is the most beautiful of all. He is so young and pretty." And the old swans bowed their heads before him. Then he felt quite ashamed, and hid his head under his wing, for he didn't know what to do. He was so happy, and yet not at all proud. He had been persecuted and despised from his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all of the birds. Even the elder tree bent down its boughs into the water before him, and the sun shone warm and bright. Then he rustled his feathers, curved his slender neck, and cried joyfully from the depths of his heart, "I never dreamed of such happiness as this while I was an ugly duckling." The end of The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Shahd.
The Velveteen Rabbit, or How Toys Become Real, by Marjorie Williams. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior, and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas, and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion who was made by the disabled soldiers and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by and by break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the Skin Horse, understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked. "Or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "You become. It takes a long time." That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. "I suppose you are real?" said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the Skin Horse might be sensitive. But the Skin Horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago, but once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in cupboards. She called this tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown he came down soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime, so she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery, when all the house was silent, and his talks with the Skin Horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him, and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together in whispers when Nana had gone away to her supper and left the nightlight burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close round him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail coming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow, and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come and look for him with the candle because the boy couldn't go to sleep until he was there. He was wet through with the dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with a corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that what the Skin Horse had said was true at last, The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes, that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived there was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he could be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet padded softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched.
"Why don't you get up and play with us?"
one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork.
"Ho!"
said the furry rabbit.
"It's as easy as anything."
And he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs.
"I don't believe you can,"
he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so.
"Can you hop on your hind legs?"
asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken, and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked.
"He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs!"
And he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I am sitting on them."
"Then stretch them out and show me, like this,"
said the wild rabbit, and he began to whirl round and dance till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards.
"He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real."
"I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I am real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought, "why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken, and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned grey, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit any more, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently, and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright sunny morning and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out to the balcony wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes with just his head peeping out and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burnt. "Hooray!" thought the little rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside." For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs, and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she asked. "That," said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What nonsense! Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to care very much about it. For tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden. How happy they were! And a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other, the fairy huts in the flower-bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out and the children don't need them any more, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved, for when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether. And he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose. And before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. And he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling round as the others did, and he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. End of The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. Read by Teresa Spencer.